There was SS with the dogs, clubbing, rouse, rouse, rouse.
These are people who lived through the madness.
It was hell on earth, that's all I can say.
Their memories are testimony to horror and heroism.
Why did I join the resistance? I wanted to live.
Some even had a chance to fight back.
I had a much better reason for fighting against my fatherland. I had personal experience.
These are local people who experienced the worst but made the most of their survival. These are stories of the Holocaust.
It gave us the courage to, first of all, live for the other person. I knew I have to stick it out because I have to have my dad with me. And that's what kept me going.
Sam Gottesman survived the Holocaust with his father Isaak. Their love for each other helped them endure starvation and sickness, years of slave labor, and two of the most horrific death camps, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen.
I was born in the Carpathian Mountain region, which was originally Czechoslovakia. We were a family of 7 children. We had 3 brothers and 4 sisters, and mom and dad, of course.
The Gottesman family was among the 1,500 Jews living in a little town called Irshava. The family owned a hardware store and lived a fairly uneventful life until 1938, when the Germans annexed Czechoslovakia. The Hungarians, members of the Axis powers along with Nazi Germany, took over the part of Czechoslovakia that included Irshava. That all came with Hitler's blessings, and Jews soon began to face restrictions.
We had to apply for permits to operate a business, and then of course they were all rejected. And so legally we had no way of making a living.
Jewish businesses were confiscated and given to Hungarians to run. But somehow an underground market developed, and the Jews of Irshava survived until March 1944, when the Germans turned against the Hungarians for holding secret peace negotiations with the Allies.
It was a Friday night, I think, was the first night, that German soldiers came into town. Sunday morning, the town crier went from places to places and announced that the Jews have to pack up a bundle for themselves and take only what they can carry with them. By noon, we are to report at the synagogue courtyard. They ordered us into a ghetto, and all those 1,500 families had to move into those few houses.
A week later, the Jews were ordered to the train station. They were sent to the nearby town of Munkac, a gathering point for the Jews of Czechoslovakia and Hungary. 30,000 people were crammed together.
One day, everybody had to line up. A group of 80, 85, 90 people together, families together, 5 per rows, and we all had to stand still. He came in, I remember seeing him with 2 young SS guards on the side of him, and he walked around us. I found out after the war it was Eichmann himself.
It was a chance encounter with Adolf Eichmann, the evil mastermind behind the deportation of Jews to ghettos and concentration camps through Nazi-occupied Europe.
That particular day when he came in and looked it over, and that's when they started loading the first train to Auschwitz. We got loaded on those boxcars, family together, and of course we were crowded in there. We were given 2 buckets, a bucket of water and a bucket for your physical needs.
As bad as that was, what came next was unimaginable.
And that's when hell broke loose. He opened up, and it was SS, the helpers were the Jewish boys, with the dogs, clubbing, rouse, 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 don't touch anything, leave every day, rouse, 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 men separate, women separate, don't talk, don't ask any questions, don't keep in, knocking us down. And it was hell on earth. My mother and sisters were separated in the other line and don't see them anymore. And I was together with my father, at least that much. So we were trying to hold on to each other.
Sam was prisoner number 37052, his father 37051. They stayed in Auschwitz only 2 days before being picked to go to a slave labor camp in a little town near the Czech border.
We were together up to about December of 1944.
Sam hurt himself cutting lumber and was sent to another camp to recover. He thought he'd never see his dad again.
He had problems with his legs, my dad. There were some boils coming out from starvation, I guess. And he asked the doctor to send him off to a hospital, which usually don't do that. For some reason, he was hoping to go somewhere. So he had no idea where I was. But he succeeded in convincing the doctor to send him off too.
Where did they send Isaak Gottesman? Sam was in the new labor camp called Giersdorf, in the hospital where they brought in new patients.
And I was standing and watching them marching in, and here I take a look at my dad. I just, I gave up actually on my dad. I never thought that we will never get together again.
Their relationship helped them remain human in an inhumane time, even when a bowl of soup could tear people apart.
When we come home from work, first thing we were worried about is, what are we going to get for supper tonight? This is very important. It's the first thing we wanted to know.
Food was such an issue for the starving prisoners that they even planned when and where to stand in line to get their best food or the biggest portions. Sam loved the soup with biscuits.
And I asked one of the fellows who were part from the kitchen staff, I asked him, what do we have for tonight? He says, we have Biscottensuppe. I says, what? Biscottensuppe. I just took my spoon and put it took a dip into it, and started tasting it, and it was like cookies, melted cookies. I says, my God, I could not believe that this was what it is. And I just walked in to my barrack, slowly tasting it. I dared not eat it all at one time. And I came into the room, and my dad was there, and we enjoyed every spoon of it. And then we came almost to the end of it, and I said to myself, I have to get another bowl of this soup.
Sam decided to pretend he fell and spilled his meal. He smeared a little of the precious soup on his clothes and went back near the kitchen. At the risk of a terrible beating, he asked for more, and amazingly, he received it.
Turned around, I started walking to the barrack where my father is. And I started debating with me. This is where the devil is in it. I says, I have a bowl of soup. I'm hungry. I know my dad is hungry too, but he doesn't know I have it. So if I don't share with him, so what? He had his. And I kept on debating and debating. And I finally got into the barrack, and my father takes a look, and his eyes popped open. He said, what happened? Where did you get that? So I just told him what happened. And he says, you risked your life for this bowl of soup? I said, I did it, that's all. And I did share the soup with my father. And this is what you have to overcome when you have a question or a questionable behavior that you have to solve right there and then. So I'm glad that I was able to overcome my desires and hunger and share it with my dad. And this is what gave us the courage to stay alive. We helped each other.
Being a Jew is being in the resistance all your life, because you're always a minority. And you have to resist the trend, the outside trend, either to assimilate you, to convert you, or to kill you.
Moshe Baran faced death many times as a member of the resistance movement against the Nazis and their collaborators. There were hundreds of thousands of fighters known as partisans, people who fought mostly behind enemy lines. Moshe was one of the estimated 20,000 to 30,000 Jewish partisans. He fought the Nazis for over 2 years.
I was born in Shtetl in Belarus, then Poland. Now it's a separate independent country, in 1920. We were a family of 6, myself and my brother and two twin sisters. Until 1939, we lived a quiet, normal, without any big aspirations life. All this has changed on September 17, 1939, when the Soviets invaded my hometown.
Moshe's town was under Soviet rule for almost 2 years. At that time, Germany and the Soviets were allies and divided up Poland. But in June 1941, the Germans turned on their allies, the Soviets.
In 4 or 5 days, coming from Eastern Prussia, they were in my hometown. They started issuing all kinds of restrictions of movement. For example, you were not allowed to use the sidewalks. You had to walk in the street. You had to wear the Star of David front and back. And around November, I think December 1941, there's a new decree. We have to evacuate our homes and move to an assigned area.
The 1,500 Jews of Moshe's town of Horodok were crammed into a ghetto of less than 20 houses. Life soon became desperate.
A group of young people like myself, I was at that time 21, began to talk among us, what am I going to do? There were 2 suggestions, you can escape, but where do you go? Or we are going to resist.
Moshe, his brother Josh, and a few dozen young people were selected to work building the rail system for the Nazis. They left Horodok and soon met hundreds of Jews from nearby towns, also serving as slave laborers.
The area, which was heavily forested and swamps, if not for that, I wouldn't be sitting here. And there was building up a resistance.
Russian soldiers who had escaped when the Nazis turned on them formed the backbone of the partisan resistance. They were soon joined by thousands of local people conquered by the Germans who wanted to fight back.
There was a lot of weapons left by the Russian army when they retreated. Scattered, some of them was collected by farmers, and some of them was found around. And there was a beginning of a resistance in the forest by minor skirmishes attacking individual Germans or something like that.
Moshe and some Jewish friends hatched a plan to steal some weapons and use them to join a partisan unit.
The 2 of my friends from the ghetto worked in a neighboring warehouse where the Germans collected captured Russian weapons. And they were sorting it out, whatever they were doing. When they told me that, I don't know who started, but we worked at a plan where they would carry out parts of those weapons into the yard. There was a pile of junk. Wrap it up, hide it.
With help from a fellow prisoner, Moshe escaped from the ghetto.
I'm in the forest now, and one morning, there are 2 Russian officers walking through the forest. Naturally, I stopped them. I speak Russian, and I introduced myself, and they told me they were sent to the front line to organize the resistance movement here, particularly training people in sabotage, mining roads, attacking garrisons and things like that. And it turned out to be 2 Jewish officers. And I told them they would like to join the resistance movement. I have weapons hidden in the ghetto.
Moshe was safe for the time being, and he learned most of his family was too. They fled Horodok and ended up in a different ghetto in the nearby village of Krasny. Finally, Moshe arranged with a sympathetic farmer named Kowalski to smuggle his family out where they could hide on a farm. He also arranged with Kowalski to get the weapons he and his friends had smuggled into the ghetto, out of the ghetto.
It was arranged that I will meet him and the partisans in a certain village, and they'll accept the weapons and accept me.
But some non-Jewish partisans stole the weapons. Kowalski told him,
they don't want to accept any Jews in the partisans, so they took the weapons and they gave it to the locals, whom they knew.
Without weapons, the Jewish boys couldn't join the partisans, and all around Moshe, things were getting worse. In July 1942, the Nazis murdered the last remaining Jews of Horodok, rounding them up into a barn, machine gunning them, and then setting the barn on fire. And the Jews of Krasny were all killed in March 1943.
I finally joined the partisans. I was attached to a certain group. In the beginning, in 1942, we were a small group doing very little, just trying to survive ourselves, Some people would go out on the operation and raid a farm, just take whatever we could for ourselves. We built bunkers in the forest. There's plenty of wood for the winter. It's a Russian winter. It's 20 degrees below zero. In July 43, the Germans started harassing our groups throughout the whole territory because we were disrupting their supplies to the front line. We were mining roads, we were ambushing their convoys on the highways, blowing up trains, and they had trouble supplying the fronts. They couldn't supply and they couldn't protect their back. And if they were retreating, we were menacing them too. So when we knew that they are after us, we would retreat.
In 1944, the Russian army closed in on the Germans, forcing their retreat. It was the beginning of the end of Moshe's nightmare.
One day, we hear noise on the highway. Here they are, the Soviet tanks and trucks and planes moving west. So here we are free. We couldn't return to my hometown because my hometown was destroyed by our own people who came back. They took care of the collaborators and the head of the city hall, the mayor, and they burned the town.
But Moshe was luckier than most. His mother, brother, and one of his twin sisters survived the war. The family reunited and after a difficult journey came to the United States, and Moshe and his sister Minna settled in Pittsburgh.
Why did I join the resistance? I wanted to live. I knew what was coming.
In May of 1939, when I was 14, we got permission to come to the United States. Had we not gotten out just in time, or had we been rejected again by the consul, by the American consul, we would have been in that position of being sent to death camps. And of course, like most people who were sent to the death camp, would have been killed.
Fritz Ottenheimer, his parents and sister Ilse were very lucky. They got out of Constance, Germany just in time. But 6 years later, Fritz returned, this time to help fight the Nazis.
Well, I was 8 years old when Hitler came to power. It didn't take long before I realized that This was a very drastic change that wasn't just for the adults, it wasn't just something political. It affected every one of us, even the kids, because the tremendous amount of propaganda, hateful speeches, and then the restrictions came, all kinds of laws, cutting down on what we could do.
Though restrictive laws soon were in place, the people of Constance weren't hostile to the 500 Jews who lived there.
Some 200 or 300 people immigrated to Constance from other parts of Germany that were more vicious. They heard that Constance was a better town.
Jews fleeing the Nazi regime from other cities soon started pouring into Constance. The city is on the Swiss border, and Switzerland offered safe haven. Fritz's dad helped one family cross a small creek into Switzerland.
Well, they must have called their relatives and friends immediately, and soon we had a stream of people coming through our house, to our house, for the purpose of being smuggled into Switzerland.
Fritz's dad was joined by a sympathetic local police officer who felt the Nazi persecution of the Jews was wrong. They helped between 200 and 300 people escape into Switzerland, but then things went wrong for the Ottenheimers.
People stopped coming to our store. Without customers, you can't run a store very long. So we had to give up our store very early after the Nazis came to power. Then in 1938 came Kristallnacht. That was really the first nationally organized violence in Germany. There was no doubt after that that we had to get out. Constance had an SS squad. Constance had the Gestapo, the secret police. Constance had a fanatical Nazi mayor, but the population generally didn't participate much, except waving flags and things like that. When Kristallnacht came, the SS squad blew up the synagogue with explosives. The Gestapo arrested all the Jewish men above age 16 and transported them to Dachau concentration camp.
Fritz's dad was one of those arrested. They held him in Dachau for a month before he was released.
It was just in time, because if they'd kept him another week or so, I don't think he would have survived. So he came back, and we were waiting. Finally, in May of 1939, when I was 14, we got permission to come to the United States.
Fritz went through high school excelling as a student and then was eligible to be drafted.
I was accepted into the United States Army on the condition that I sign a waiver. Because I was not a citizen of the United States, I could not be forced to serve in the Army of the United States. I did not enjoy the idea of joining this tremendous conflict. At the same time, my feeling was that I had a much better reason for fighting against my fatherland than all the other recruits had. All they knew about Nazi Germany was what they read in the newspapers. I had personal experience of the persecution.
Trained as a sharpshooter, Fritz soon was given a different job.
Along came this other outfit, which was an artillery battalion that had been converted into a security guard. And they needed someone who could speak German. Then the war ended, and the rest of the unit I was with was sent back to the United States for discharge, because they were all long veterans of the fighting. I was transferred into military government, special branch it was called, which was responsible for denazification. It was responsible for screening people who had applied or were applying for jobs in the German government, for jobs in the German police force, in the education activity, trying to keep the old Nazis out of important jobs where they could get back into power. We had SS records, Gestapo records, very important. We had the personnel records of war factories where people applied for employment and had to prove their loyalty to the Nazi regime in order to get the job. And they made all these statements of how much they loved Hitler and the government, and it was signed and notarized. So we had wonderful evidence for people in that area. It gave me a lot of satisfaction to know that I could actually get back at some of these people for things that they had done. How could it happen? What is the lesson that we learned from studying the Holocaust? The most important lesson, I think, that I came up with myself was there were 65 million Germans living in Germany when Hitler came to power. 65 million Germans did not become 65 million murderers. They became 65 million bystanders.